My grandfather called CPS on me with lies. I confronted him in front of 200 guests. I was standing in the middle of our church fellowship hall, the smell of cheap coffee and powdered donuts clinging to the air, when my grandfather leaned across the table, smiled like nothing was wrong, and whispered, "CPS will take those kids from you sooner than you think." My blood ran cold. My knees nearly buckled. My 2 toddlers were chasing balloons in the corner, laughing, their voices mixing with the hum of hymns playing faintly over the speakers. And all I could hear was the echo of his words. That was the moment I realized my own grandfather wasn't just cruel, he was actively trying to destroy me. But let me back up. I'm Elizabeth, 23 now, and a single mom of 2 little ones. Before I had kids, life felt hard but manageable. I was in school, working part-time, and dreaming small but steady dreams, a stable job, a safe home, maybe even one day that perfect family life. When I got pregnant young, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me, but I found strength I didn't know I had. My dad, Lionel, stepped up for me when nobody else did. He was 44 at the time, still carrying the weight of his own messy divorce, but he swore, "Lizzie, you'll never do this alone." And for a while, I believed him. The problem was George, my grandfather, Lionel's dad. He never approved of me keeping my babies. From the beginning, he'd sneer at family dinners, swirling his glass of expensive wine while mumbling, "Girls like you throw your future away." He'd pat my shoulder as if it were a joke, but his eyes were sharp, dissecting me. I brushed it off, telling myself he was old-fashioned, out of touch. Then came the early morning knock at the door. CPS. It was March 4th, 2022. I remember because I had just scraped together my $450 car payment the night before and was finally feeling like I could breathe. My daughter was still in her pajamas, hair tangled, clutching her stuffed rabbit. My son had cereal smeared on his face. The knock rattled the entire apartment, and my chest squeezed so hard I thought I'd pass out. The social worker's words blurred into each other. We got a report of neglect and fit conditions, possible endangerment. I wanted to scream. My place wasn't perfect, but it was clean, safe, and full of love. The only person who could have called. George. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. "Just making sure you're capable," he said, with that same smile he'd wear at church, as if his cruelty was charity. That was the first red flag I couldn't ignore. Still, family pressure is a strange kind of chain. My dad begged me to keep the peace. He said in his ways, Lionel muttered, trying to pour me some of George's overpriced wine during a forced family dinner. The glass was smooth in my hand, but it tasted sour, bitter, laced with betrayal. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the floor with an old shoebox filled with letters my mom had written me before she passed. Her handwriting smelled faintly of expensive perfume she used to dab her stationery with it, so her letters felt like hugs. She wrote, "Trust yourself, Lizzie, you're stronger than their judgment." I pressed those words against my heart and cried. But strength is complicated when it's 2 a.m. You've had nightmares about losing your kids, and you wake up gasping, sweat drenching your shirt. When your mind won't stop replaying the social worker's raised eyebrow as she scanned your fridge for food. When whispers at school pick up follow you like a shadow, parents pulling their kids a little closer, avoiding your smile. I tried to hold it together. Therapy became my lifeline. My therapist's voice was steady, anchoring me. "This is textbook narcissistic upset. He's trying to control you through fear. That's risk." Still, fear has a way of creeping in even when you know its name. And yet, even after that terrifying CPS visit, I kept going to church gatherings. I wanted my kids to have a sense of community, even if mine was poisoned. That's why I was there on that Sunday morning when George leaned across the table, eyes glinting like polished knives, and whispered his threat. It wasn't just a red flag anymore. It was war. After that Sunday, every smile from George felt like poison. Every handshake at church, every nod during hymnals, it was all a mask. And I realized something terrifying. If he could call CPS once, he could do it again. I started noticing things I had brushed off before. My neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, suddenly began lingering by her window in the early mornings while I loaded my kids into the car. She used to just wave politely, maybe gossip about the weather. Now she scribbled things in a notebook. At first, I thought I was paranoid. Trauma does that, it rewires your brain so you second-guess everything. But then I overheard her talking to George in hushed tones near the church parking lot. He slipped something into her hand. Her eyes darted around before she shoved it into her purse. That was the moment it clicked. She was being paid to spy on me. Through my own windows. My sanctuary wasn't safe anymore. I told my dad, Lionel. He rubbed his temples, sighing, "Lizzie, you can't keep blaming him for everything. Maybe you're just on edge after CPS." His words stung worse than the betrayal itself. I wanted to scream, "Why aren't you protecting me?" But instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Because that's what years of family conditioning teach you, to minimize your own pain so you don't rock the boat. Before I had kids, I thought I was strong. I thought I could handle anything life threw at me. But there's nothing that strips you raw like the thought of losing your children. That fear made me paranoid, jumpy. I'd bowled up right at 3 a.m. to check locks, pacing the apartment, my heart pounding like I was about to be arrested. My nightmares weren't just dreams anymore, they were full-blown panic attacks. My therapist wrote down hypervigilance on her notepad, explaining how it wires your brain to constantly scan for threats. She was right. Every creak of my floorboards, every knock at the door felt like an attack. And then came the lawyer. George somehow convinced me under the guise of helping her to consult his attorney about custody to make sure I was safe. I was desperate for any ounce of reassurance, so I agreed. The man was slick, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my rent. His office smelled like leather and cologne so strong it made me dizzy. He leaned back in his chair and smiled, all teeth. Elizabeth will take good care of you, but you know, custody courts don't always look kindly on single mothers, especially young ones with financial instability. He said those words slowly, like knives cutting into me. I clutched my purse tighter, the strap digging into my palm. I'm stable, my bills are paid, I take care of my kids. But he just nodded sympathetically, scribbling something on a yellow legal pad, and I couldn't shake the feeling he was working against me. Later, I found out he had a financial arrangement with George, money exchanged under the table to drag my case out, drain me dry, and keep me vulnerable. A school pickup, whispers followed me. I caught fragments, CPS, neglect, unstable, other moms pulled away when I stood in line, like my supposed unfitness was contagious. My son asked me why no one wanted to play with him anymore. That broke something inside me. My kids were paying for sins I hadn't even committed. The breaking point came one early morning when I found footprints outside my apartment window. They weren't mine, they weren't my kids, and they weren't Lionel's. My neighbor was spying again. I pressed my forehead to the glass, rage and terror boiling together. For the first time, I thought about revenge not out of pettiness, but because I was cornered, humiliated, stripped of dignity. That night, I sat on the floor again with my mom's shoebox of letters. I pulled out one I hadn't read in years. The paper was yellowed, fragile, but her words hit like fire. Lizzie, when they lie to your face, you'll know who they are. Don't let them define you. Fight back. I cried until I couldn't breathe. Then I wiped my face and made a decision. If George wanted a war, I'd stop playing defense. What I didn't know was that the next discovery would shatter every last illusion of safety I had left. The morning I discovered the truth, the sun hadn't even risen yet. My kids were still asleep, their soft breathing filling the silence of our apartment. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my overdue utility bill when my phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. Normally, I ignored those, but something in my gut told me to answer. Elizabeth, a shaky female voice asked. You don't know me, but I think we've both been through the same hell with George. My heart stopped. Her name was Diane, and she claimed George had pulled the exact same stunts on her cousin years back. CPS calls, false reports, paid neighbors to watch. Her cousin lost custody of her children. He thrives on it, Diane whispered. He destroys women who he thinks don't deserve their kids. I sat there frozen, the smell of stale coffee filling the room. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. For weeks, I thought I was losing my mind, but now I knew I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't alone. This wasn't just family drama, this was a pattern of... I hung up and immediately called my dad. Dad, listen, Diane just told me. But Lionel cut me off. Lizzie, he's spiraling. Don't drag strangers into this. He's my father. He may be harsh, but he's not evil. Hearing my dad defend George felt like another knife in my back. It wasn't the first time he minimized things, but this time it broke something in me. Even my own father can't see what's happening. The next week, I noticed the betrayal spreading further. At the grocery store, the cashier avoided eye contact. At the playground, parents gathered in little huddles, lowering their voices when I walked past. One mom finally muttered, "We just don't want trouble around our kids." I went home and sobbed on the bathroom floor, clutching a towel to my mouth so my children wouldn't hear. Then came the real bombshell. While digging through my old shoebooks of letters one night seeking comfort again, I found something else tucked beneath them. An old police report from years ago that my mom had kept. My hands went cold as I read it. A car accident. My mom's accident. The one that had haunted my family, left me with PTSD and nightmares of screeching tires and twisted metal. The report mentioned a vehicle description. A make, a model. It was George's. I felt like the floor fell out from under me. He had caused the accident that destroyed my life, the accident that... my mom. And he had hidden it, letting us believe it was fate. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. I screamed into my pillow that night until my voice went hoarse. My therapist later called it trauma collapse, when your mind can't process one more ounce of betrayal. From that day, the nightmares multiplied. I saw headlights in every dark street corner. I woke drenched in sweat, heart hammering so loud I thought my kids could hear it from their rooms. I jumped to every sudden noise, every knock, every stranger's glance. And yet, as broken as I felt, I also felt rage like I'd never known. Because now I knew the full truth. George hadn't just tried to destroy my present. He had destroyed my past. I told my dad. He stared at me, his face pale, then whispered, "If this is true, then everything I thought about him," and his voice broke. But then, almost in the same breath, he added, "Lizzie, don't bring this up publicly, it'll ruin us." I couldn't believe it. My dad was more afraid of shame than justice. And then, other things weren't already collapsing, I learned about the greedy lawyer's betrayal. A clerk at the courthouse accidentally let slip that George had been funneling money into the lawyer's consultation fees. I wasn't crazy. My own legal counsel had been compromised. It felt like my entire life was one massive spiderweb, and George was the spider at the center. Every strand I reached for neighbors, community, even my father was sticky, pulling me deeper into isolation. But deep inside, beneath the panic attacks and the paranoia, something was changing. Because once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. And I knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that George was a monster hiding in plain sight. I swore to myself that one day, one public date, I'd expose him. And that opportunity came in the most dramatic, gut-wrenching way imaginable, his wedding. The wedding was the last place I thought I'd see George again, and yet there I was, standing in the back of a lavish church hall at 5:00 p.m., the sun outside painting the stained glass windows in warm, false serenity. 200 guests milled around, champagne flutes in hand, while the scent of roses and cologne hung heavy in the air. I hadn't planned to make a scene. I'd thought about it for weeks, rehearsing every word in the mirror, shaking with anxiety, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But as soon as I saw George at the altar, perfectly poised in his tuxedo, the memory of every nightmare, every false accusation, every betrayal hit me at once. He looked at me and smiled, though, that same smug smile, completely unaware that the very woman he had tormented for years was about to strip him bare in front of his friends, family, and the woman marrying him. I walked forward, hands trembling, clutching a folder of evidence I'd painstakingly gathered over months, copies of the CPS reports, bank statements proving the lawyer's kickbacks, Dan's testimony, and the police report proving George's involvement in my mom's fatal accident. My kids were safe with my best friend in the pews, but I could feel their absence in my chest like a physical ache. "Excuse me," I said, voice shaking but loud enough to turn heads. Everyone stop for a second, I have something important to say. The chatter died instantly. Guests turned, eyebrows raised. The bride froze, bouquet halfway to her face. And George's smile faltered just for a heartbeat. I took a deep breath. "My name is Elizabeth, and this man," I gestured toward George, "has spent decades manipulating, lying, and terrorizing me. He filed false CPS reports to take my children away, paid neighbors to spy on me, and even went as far as causing the accident that killed my mother." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Someone shouted, "Lies." I held up the police report. "You can see for yourself, this isn't a lie. This is documented proof." George's face went white. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His bride turned to him, eyes wide. The murmur of whispers became a wave of chatter. People were shaking their heads, pointing fingers. "You lied to me for years." I continued, my voice rising, tears streaming down my face. "You destroyed my life while pretending to be family, and now, after everything, you try to walk down this aisle with everyone fooled." A few guests murmured support, others recoiled. The greedy lawyer, sitting near the back, squirmed in his chair as I presented his receipts and bank statements proving he'd been paid to sabotage my case. George's hands shook as he stepped back, looking for some escape. His friends murmured to each other, scandalized. For the first time in decades, he had no control. Then came the final blow. "And you're not the first," I said, pulling Diane's signed testimony from the folder. "He's done this to others before. I'm not alone, and now everyone knows." I saw him glance at the door, then the windows, realizing the shame would follow him forever. The bride's face twisted in horror. Guests whispered, some took out their phones to record. In that instant, George and the lawyer both turned and fled the church, leaving behind a trail of chaos. The hall was silent except for my ragged breathing. I sank into a pew, clutching the folder like a lifeline. Relief and adrenaline coursed through me, but so did exhaustion. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Heard. Validated. My dad found me minutes later. "Lizzie, He couldn't finish. His eyes were full of tears and regret. "You were supposed to protect me," I whispered. But I didn't wait for an answer. I had done it. I had taken back control. The aftermath was immediate. Police got involved to investigate the lawyer and George's past actions. Social workers revisited the old cases. My name cleared slowly, painfully, in the community. Parents who had avoided me came forward with apologies, and while some damage was irreversible, I finally felt a weight lift from my chest. And yet, even in that moment of triumph, I knew the real battle had only just begun. The emotional fallout, the panic attacks, and the months of therapy ahead. But for the first time, I realized I wasn't defined by George's cruelty. I was defined by how I survived it. I left that church that day shaking, but not broken. I had faced him publicly, and I had won not just legally, but psychologically. After George fled the wedding, I should have felt relief, but instead, the world seemed heavier than ever. My adrenaline crashed, leaving me hollow, shaking, and unable to eat. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, the faint smell of my mom's perfume lingering in the shoebox of letters beside me, and realized something horrifying. I had survived the confrontation, but I hadn't survived him. The nightmares returned worse than before. Every creak of the floor, every distant car horn, sent me spiraling. I'd wake up gasping at 2 a.m., heart pounding, convinced CPS was at my door again. My hands would shake so violently that even the $450 car payment envelope I had set aside weeks earlier would tremble in my grip. Even the people who had witnessed George's humiliation didn't understand the depth of what I had been through. At the grocery store, I'd catch parents whispering behind their hands. She was always unstable, one woman murmured to another, oblivious to the years of terror I'd endured. At my kids' school, teachers were polite but distant, unsure how to treat the mother who had publicly accused a family member of crimes at a wedding. My children noticed the tension too. My son asked, "Mom, why are people staring at us?" Then my daughter hid behind my leg, clutching her stuff rather tightly. Therapy became a lifeline once again. Dr. Harris, my therapist, sat with me in her small office at 10 a.m. every Tuesday and Thursday, always calm, always patient. "Elizabeth, what you're experiencing is textbook PTSD from narcissistic," she said during one session. "The panic attacks, the hypervigilance, the distrust, it's your brain protecting you, even when it's counterproductive." I nodded numbly. I had learned these terms, repeated them in my head, but knowing them didn't make it easier. I cried through most sessions, sometimes screaming, sometimes shaking uncontrollably. I felt like I had lost not just my childhood, but my early adulthood, my dignity, and for a while, even my hope. Even finances became a source of anxiety. I had barely scraped together the $450 car payment the month before, and now, with legal fees piling up and therapy bills adding to the debt, I felt trapped. I'd sit on the couch staring at the numbers, heart racing, thinking about how George had manipulated everyone around me to make me vulnerable and broke. Socially, I withdrew completely. Friends didn't know how to support me. Some stopped calling. Even my father was distant. Our relationship was fractured beyond repair, filled with unspoken resentment and guilt. I felt utterly isolated, surrounded by people yet completely alone. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me, judging me. Every compliment was laced with skepticism. Every smile from a stranger felt hollow. The trauma had rewired my thinking. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my own instincts. I would check locks obsessively, review phone records for unusual activity, and double-check every bill and receipt. Panic attacks became routine. Nightmares invaded my sleep so frequently that I began sleeping with lights on, terrified of the dark. There were moments I wondered if I'd ever feel safe again. Nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about George's smug face at church, the whispered threats, the letters in the shoebox, and the stolen years of my mother's life. I felt rage, grief, and hopelessness intertwining in a way that was almost paralyzing. And yet, beneath the despair, a small ember of determination burned. If George had taken so much from me, then rebuilding my life was the only act of defiance left. Therapy, financial planning, reconnecting with a few trusted friends, it all became steps toward reclaiming myself. One night, I held my kids close and whispered to them, "Mommy is going to fix this, I promise." I didn't fully believe it yet, but it was the first step toward taking back control. The rock bottom was raw, vivid, and suffocating, but it also became the crucible in which my resolve hardened. I realized that to survive, I couldn't just confront George. I had to rebuild every aspect of my life, starting with my mind, my finances, and my home. Recovery didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, deliberate process, a patchwork of therapy sessions, financial planning, and small victories stacked like bricks. I started with my mental health. Dr. Harris guided me through cognitive behavioral therapy, helping me reframe my panic attacks and nightmares not as personal failings, but as responses to trauma. "Elizabeth, your brain is healing," she reminded me. Slowly, I learned to breathe through the terror, to tell my mind, "This is not happening now. You are safe." I set up a strict routine. Early mornings became my anchor. 6:30 a.m., wake-ups, quiet coffee, journaling. I'd savor the little things I had ignored during the nightmares, my kids' sleepy smiles, the taste of expensive wine I treated myself to on my birthday, and the smell of fresh flowers I bought for our tiny apartment. I even returned to the shoebox of letters from my mom, reading her words not with grief, but as fuel. "Trust yourself, Lizzie, you're stronger than their judgment." Financial independence was next. I started freelancing while working part-time, keeping meticulous track of every $450 car payment and every dollar saved. Budgeting, negotiating raises, and cutting unnecessary expenses felt tedious at first, but each small victory, the extra $50 saved, the reduction of a recurring bill, was proof I was reclaiming control. The breakthrough came 6 months later. I'd saved enough for a down payment, and in September 2023, I closed on my dream house at 1423 Willow Creek Lane. Walking through the empty rooms for the first time, I felt a joy I hadn't known since childhood. Every wall, every floorboard, every sunlit window was mine, protected, safe, and entirely on my terms. I bought furniture that smelled of polished wood and fabric, hung curtains with care, and placed my children's toys exactly where I wanted them. This house wasn't just a structure, it was a declaration that I had survived and thrived. I continued therapy weekly, but I also sought community. I joined a mother's support group, carefully choosing friends who were supportive and trustworthy. No whispers, no judgment, just empathy and solidarity. Other parents who had avoided me in the past began to see me as a resilient figure, someone who had endured and rebuilt. For the first time in years, I felt fully seen, fully respected. Legally, I made sure George's crimes and manipulations were exposed. Diane and other victims joined me in reporting his past abuses, leading to investigations and accountability. I was no longer afraid, my voice carried weight. Every time a court officer or investigator reviewed my evidence, every time someone confirmed the truth, I felt a piece of my soul reclaim itself. And the psychological transformation was profound. The panic attacks became rare, manageable. I no longer woke up drenched in sweat at 2 a.m., and the hypervigilance that had ruled my life began to fade. I was rebuilding my mind as surely as I was rebuilding my home. My children felt the shift to their laughter return fully, their trust in me solid and unshakable. By the time the first snow fell on Willow Creek Lane, I was cooking dinner with my kids, the smell of roast chicken and fresh herbs filling the air, while sipping a glass of the expensive wine I had bought to celebrate my freedom. I glanced at the shoebox of letters I'd finally moved to a shelf in the living room, visible, honored, a reminder of my resilience. I often thought back to that fateful church gathering, to the early morning CPS knock, to the whispers and isolation. And I realized something crucial: George's attempts to destroy me had succeeded only in forging a stronger version of myself. Now, at 23, I'm financially independent, emotionally resilient, and fiercely protective of my family. The nightmares still visit occasionally, but I meet them with courage. The panic attacks are memories, not definitions. My past trauma didn't disappear, but I transformed it into fuel. I rebuilt my life brick by brick, lesson by lesson, and in doing so, I finally reclaimed what George tried to steal: my voice, my dignity, and my home. I am Elizabeth, survivor, mother, and victor of a war I never asked for but ultimately won. The future is mine now, safe, self-made, and full of possibility.